Detective Raymond Ray Williams had been retired for only 6 months, but his 30-year law enforcement instincts never took a break. When he heard faint, muffled screams coming from his neighbor's basement at a.m., most people would have assumed it was a TV show or dismissed it entirely. But Ray knew the difference between fictional screams and real terror. What he discovered in his neighbor's house would become one of the most horrific serial killer cases in the city's history, and his decades of experience would be the only thing standing between more victims and a psychopath who had been hunting in plain sight. If you believe that experience and instincts can save lives, and that true evil often hides behind a friendly face, hit that subscribe button right now and tell us where you're watching from, because this story will show you why a detective's training never really ends, even in retirement. Ray Williams had always been a light sleeper, a habit developed over 3 decades of being on call for homicide investigations. Even in retirement, his internal alarm system remained finely tuned to sounds that didn't belong in the quiet suburban neighborhood he had chosen for his golden years. At T58, Ray looked every inch the veteran detective he was. Gray temples framed intelligent dark eyes that still held the sharp awareness of someone who had spent 30 years investigating the worst crimes humanity could commit. His bearing was confident but not aggressive, the posture of a man who had faced down killers and emerged with his integrity intact. The house on Maple Street had been his reward for 3 decades of service, a modest 2-story colonial in a quiet neighborhood where the biggest crime was usually teenagers toilet papering trees on Halloween. After years of working brutal homicide cases, gang violence, and domestic murders, Ray had looked forward to the peace and predictability of suburban life. His neighbor, Mike Peterson, had been one of the first to welcome him to the neighborhood 6 months ago. Mike was 42, friendly, but not intrusive, the kind of neighbor who would offer to help with yard work or accept packages when you weren't home. He worked as an IT consultant, mostly from home, and lived alone in the large Victorian house he had inherited from his parents. To everyone on Maple Street, Mike was the perfect neighbor, helpful, quiet, and respectful. But Ray's cop instincts had picked up subtle things that bothered him, though he dismissed them as occupational paranoia. Mike's basement windows were always covered with thick curtains. He received a lot of deliveries at odd hours. His garbage was always triple-bagged and taken to the curb just before pickup, never the night before, like everyone else. Small things that probably meant nothing, but which had logged themselves in Ray's subconscious. On this particular Tuesday night in October, Ray had gone to bed early after a quiet evening watching television. The neighborhood was peaceful, as it always was, tree-lined streets where families felt safe, where children played in yards without supervision, where people still left their doors unlocked. At 2:17 a.m., Ray's eyes snapped open. The sound was faint, barely audible through the walls of his house and the 20 feet of space between his bedroom and Mike's basement. Most people would have missed it entirely, or assumed it was a television show, or dismissed it as imagination, but Ray Williams wasn't most people. In 30 years of investigating violent crimes, Ray had developed an ear for the sounds of genuine terror. He had heard victims' final moments on 911 recordings, had listened to the desperate pleas of people fighting for their lives, had distinguished between the screams of fear, pain, and mortal terror in countless crime scene recordings. What he was hearing now was real. Someone was in desperate trouble. Ray sat up in bed, his mind immediately switching from sleepy retiree to alert detective. The sound came again, muffled, desperate, the kind of cry that came from someone who was gagged or whose voice was being suppressed. Every instinct Ray had developed over 3 decades told him that someone was fighting for their life just yards away from where he slept. He moved to his bedroom window and peered through the blinds toward Mike's house. The Victorian was dark except for a faint glow coming from what Ray knew was the basement level. Mike's car was in the driveway, which meant he was home. The muffled cries came again, and this time Ray was certain someone was being held against their will in Mike Peterson's basement. Ray's mind raced through the possibilities. Call 911 and wait for patrol units to respond? In a suburban area like this, response time could be 8 to 10 minutes. If someone was being tortured or killed, that might be too long. Investigate himself? Ray was retired, had no legal authority, and was technically trespassing if he went onto Mike's property. But he was also a trained law enforcement officer with 3 decades of experience, and someone was screaming for help 20 feet away. The decision made itself. Ray quickly dressed in dark clothes and grabbed the service weapon he still kept in his bedside safe. As a retired officer, he maintained his concealed carry permit and had never broken the habit of being armed. Tonight, he was grateful for that discipline. Moving quietly through his house, Ray slipped out his back door and across the small gap between properties. Mike's backyard was well maintained, but offered plenty of cover: mature trees, decorative bushes, and a garden shed that Ray could use to approach the house unseen. As he moved closer to Mike's basement windows, the sounds became clearer and more horrifying. Someone was definitely being held against their will, and from the desperation in the muffled cries, they were in immediate danger. Ray positioned himself near a basement window and carefully peered through a gap in the heavy curtains. What he saw made his blood run cold. The confrontation between a retired detective and a serial killer would test every skill Ray had learned in 3 decades of law enforcement. The rescued victim, identified as 23-year-old Jennifer Walsh, provided crucial testimony about Mike Peterson's methods and his admissions about previous killings. She had been held for 3 days, during which Mike had detailed his previous crimes with the casual pride of someone describing a hobby. "He told me I was going to be number 13, Jennifer told investigators through tears. "He said he was getting better at it each time, more efficient. He showed me pictures of the other women on his phone." The FBI joined the investigation. Within 24 hours, recognizing the interstate implications of a serial killer who had been operating undetected for 8 years, Special Agent Rebecca Torres, who specialized in serial killer cases, interviewed Ray about his decision to act immediately, rather than wait for backup. Detective Williams, Agent Torres said, "You made a split-second decision that saved a life and potentially prevented future murders. But I have to ask, what made you so certain that you were dealing with a genuine emergency rather than a domestic dispute or loud television?" Ray considered the question carefully. Agent Torres, "In 30 years of investigating violent crimes, you develop an ear for authentic terror. What I heard through those walls wasn't acting or role-playing or a movie. It was someone fighting for their life. And you were willing to risk your own life based on that judgment?" "I was willing to risk my life to save someone else's. That's what police officers do, whether they're active duty or retired." The investigation revealed that Mike Peterson had been planning his next victim even as he tortured Jennifer Walsh. Police found detailed surveillance photos of 3 other potential victims, along with their daily routines and vulnerability assessments. Ray's intervention had not only saved Jennifer's life, but prevented at least 3 additional murders. During interrogation, Mike Peterson showed no remorse for his crimes, instead expressing frustration that his perfect system had been discovered. He had chosen his victims carefully, soundproofed his basement extensively, and developed disposal methods that had kept him undetected for years. "I was meticulous," Mike told investigators with obvious pride. "Every detail planned, every contingency considered. The only thing I didn't account for was having a retired detective living next door." Forensic evidence from the basement confirmed the worst fears of investigators. DNA evidence linked Mike to 14 missing persons cases across 3 states, suggesting his killing spree had been even more extensive than initially believed. Ray found himself testifying before a grand jury, explaining his decision to enter Mike's property without a warrant and use deadly force to stop an imminent threat. The legal justification was clear: he had acted to prevent imminent death or serious bodily harm to another person, which created an exception to normal search and seizure requirements. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor explained, "Detective Williams's 30 years of experience enabled him to recognize a life-threatening situation and respond appropriately. Without his intervention, Jennifer Walsh would be dead, and Michael Peterson would have continued killing innocent women." Mike Peterson was ultimately convicted of 14 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his own statements during interrogation had eliminated any possibility of a successful defense. But what Ray discovered in that basement was far worse than anything he'd encountered in 30 years of police work. The basement had been converted into what could only be described as a torture chamber. Under harsh fluorescent lighting, Ray could see a young woman, probably in her 20s, bound to a metal chair with duct tape covering her mouth. Her clothes were torn, her face was bruised, and her eyes held the wide-eyed terror of someone who knew she was going to die, but she wasn't alone. Against the far wall, Ray could see what appeared to be a makeshift morgue, several large plastic containers that his experienced eye immediately recognized as body storage. The clinical setup, the plastic sheeting on the floor, the array of tools on a nearby workbench, everything indicated that this wasn't Mike's first victim. Mike Peterson himself was methodically preparing something at the workbench, his back to both the window and his victim. He moved with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Ray's 30 years of police experience kicked in automatically. He was looking at an active serial killer, someone who had been operating undetected for what appeared to be an extended period. The woman in the chair was in immediate mortal danger, and there were clearly other victims whose remains were being stored in the basement. Every second counted. Ray pulled out his cell phone and dialed 911, keeping his voice low and urgent. "This is retired Detective Raymond Williams. Badge number 4729. I have an active kidnapping and multiple homicide situation at 847 Maple Street. Need immediate backup, ambulance, and crime scene unit. Suspect is active with a live victim. I am on scene and armed." The 911 operator's training kicked in immediately. "Detective Williams, are you certain about the situation? I have visual confirmation of a bound victim and what appears to be multiple body storage containers. This is an active serial killer situation. Get me backup now. Units are being dispatched. ETA 6 minutes. Do not engage the suspect. 6 minutes might be too long." Ray could see Mike moving toward the bound woman with something in his hand. That looked like a knife. Ray faced the same kind of split-second decision that had defined his career. Follow protocol and wait for backup, or act immediately to save a life. The woman's muffled screams made the decision for him. Ray moved to the basement's exterior door, bulkhead entrance that was common in older houses. To his surprise, it was unlocked. Mike's arrogance, or perhaps his confidence that no one would discover his activities. Ray descended the concrete steps, his weapon drawn and his movements silent. 30 years of experience had taught him how to move through a crime scene, how to approach an armed suspect, and how to prioritize the safety of victims. The basement was larger than it had appeared through the window. Besides the main area where the woman was bound, Ray could see a second room that appeared to be set up as living quarters, and a third area that was clearly being used for body disposal and cleanup. Mike Peterson was completely absorbed in his preparations, confident in his privacy and the soundproofing he had installed to muffle his victims' cries. Ray moved closer, his weapon trained on Mike's back. "Police, drop whatever you're holding and put your hands behind your head." Mike spun around, his face shifting from surprise to calculation in a fraction of a second. In his hand was a large hunting knife, and his expression showed no remorse or fear, only annoyance at being interrupted. Well, Mike said calmly. The retired detective couldn't mind his own business. The casual tone was more chilling than any scream. Ray was looking at a true psychopath, someone who felt no emotional connection to his victim's suffering. "Drop the knife, Mike. It's over." Mike smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, Detective Williams, I don't think it is. You see, you're trespassing on my property, you have no legal authority, and who's going to believe that the friendly IT consultant next door is a killer?" Ray kept his weapon steady. "The victim behind you is going to believe it. The evidence in this basement is going to believe it. And the backup units that are about to surround this house are going to believe it." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Mike's face. "You called for backup? 6 units, crime scene investigators, and a coroner. They'll be here in about 4 minutes." Mike's calculating expression shifted to desperation. He was clearly weighing his options: try to kill both Ray and the victim before police arrived, attempt to escape, or surrender and hope his lawyer could create reasonable doubt. Ray could see the moment Mike made his decision. The knife shifted in his grip, and his body language indicated he was preparing to attack. "Don't do it, Mike. You're looking at life in prison either way, but if you hurt that woman or try to attack me, you're looking at the death penalty." Eyes darted between Ray, the bound woman, and the basement stairs. Ray could hear sirens in the distance. Backup was close. "You know what, Detective?" Mike said conversationally. "I've been doing this for 8 years. 12 victims, all carefully selected, all perfectly disposed of. You've just ruined the most successful operation of my life." The casual admission of serial murder confirmed Ray's worst fears. This wasn't just about saving one victim. Mike Peterson had been killing for years, and the young woman in the chair was going to be number 13. "It's over, Mike. Put down the knife and step away from the victim." When Ray realized the true scope of his neighbor's crimes, he understood that multiple lives hung in the balance. The sound of car doors slamming outside indicated that backup had arrived. Ray could hear officers surrounding the house, their tactical training evident in their coordinated approach. Mike Peterson heard it too, and his expression shifted from calculated calm to desperate fury. "You have no idea what you've done," Mike snarled, raising the knife. She was going to be perfect. Just like all the others. Ray's finger moved to his trigger. After 30 years of law enforcement, he knew when a situation was about to turn deadly. "Mike, you have about 30 seconds before this basement is full of police officers. Your only chance of surviving this is to drop that knife right now." Instead of complying, Mike lunged toward the bound woman with the knife raised. Ray's 3 decades of training took over. He fired 2 shots center mass, stopping Mike's attack instantly. Mike Peterson collapsed to the concrete floor, the knife clattering away from his hand. Ray immediately moved to secure the weapon while keeping his gun trained on the suspect. "Police, basement is secure," Ray called out as officers began descending the stairs. The first officer through the door was Sergeant Patricia Martinez, a 20-year veteran who immediately recognized Ray from his reputation in the department. "Detective Williams, what the hell is going on here?" Ray was already moving to free the bound victim, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "Sergeant Martinez, we've got an active serial killer scene. Multiple victims. Evidence of prolonged torture and murder operation. The victim needs immediate medical attention." As Ray carefully removed the duct tape from the young woman's mouth, she gasped and began sobbing. Thank you. Oh, God. Thank you. He was going to kill me. He told me about the others. All the others." EMTs rushed into the basement as more officers secured the scene. Crime scene investigators began photographing the horrific setup, while detectives started the process of documenting what would become one of the most significant serial killer captures in the city's history. Detective Captain Sarah Rodriguez arrived within minutes, taking command of what was clearly going to be a massive investigation. "Ray," she said, approaching him as he gave his statement to investigating officers. "How did you know?" Ray looked around the basement, taking in the evidence of years of systematic murder. "I heard screams at real screams, not TV. 30 years of police work teaches you the difference." Captain Rodriguez shook her head in amazement. "If you hadn't acted when you did, she'd be dead, and he'd be planning victim number 14. Ray finished grimly. As the investigation unfolded over the following hours, the true scope of Mike Peterson's crimes became clear. The basement contained evidence of 12 previous murders, all young women who had been reported missing over the past 8 years. Mike had been selecting victims carefully, choosing women who wouldn't be immediately mistransients, sex workers, women estranged from their families. His method had been consistent: abduct the victims, hold them for several days while he tortured them, then kill them and dispose of their bodies using a sophisticated system he had developed in his basement. The soundproofing had been so effective that neighbors never heard anything, and his careful disposal methods meant bodies were never found. What Ray Williams discovered that night would not only save lives, but expose a killing spree that had gone undetected for years. 6 months after the arrest, Ray Williams found himself reluctantly accepting recognition for his actions. The police chief presented him with the Civilian Medal of Valor, and the FBI director sent a personal letter commending his courage and professional judgment. But for Ray, the real satisfaction came from a different source. Jennifer Walsh had not only survived her ordeal, but had become an advocate for missing persons awareness, working with families of Mike Peterson's other victims to ensure their loved ones were remembered. "Mr. Williams," Jennifer said at the medal ceremony, "you gave me my life back. You gave me the chance to have a future, to help other people, to make sure what happened to me and those other women never happens again." Ray had struggled with the psychological aftermath of the shooting. Even though it was clearly justified, taking a life, even to save another, wasn't something any good police officer took lightly. The department had provided counseling, and Ray had worked through the complex emotions that came with using deadly force. "The hardest part," Ray told the police psychologist, "isn't that I shot him. It's thinking about all the women who died because no one heard their screams. I happened to be in the right place at the right time, with the right experience to recognize what was happening." But how many other victims could have been saved if someone had noticed earlier? The Mike Peterson case had broader implications. For law enforcement training, police academies began using Ray's decision-making process as a case study in recognizing genuine emergencies, trusting professional instincts, and making life or death decisions under pressure. What Detective Williams demonstrated, explained Captain Rodriguez to a group of rookie officers, is that police training doesn't end when you retire. The instincts, the awareness, the commitment to protecting others, those are lifelong qualities that define real police officers. Ray's quiet suburban retirement had been permanently altered by his discovery of the horror next door. He found that he couldn't simply ignore his police instincts, couldn't pretend that evil didn't exist in peaceful neighborhoods, couldn't turn off the hypervigilance that had served him well for 3 decades. Instead, he channeled that energy into community involvement. Ray began working with neighborhood watch programs, teaching civilians how to recognize suspicious activity and trust their instincts when something didn't feel right. Most people assume that suburban neighborhoods are safe, Ray told a community meeting 6 months after the Peterson arrest. And mostly they are, but evil can exist anywhere, and it often hides behind a friendly face and a well-maintained lawn. The key is learning to trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Ray's experience had taught him that retirement from active duty didn't mean retirement from civic responsibility. His police training, his investigative experience, and his commitment to protecting others remained as strong as ever. A year after the incident, Ray received a letter that moved him more than any official recognition. It was from the family of one of Mike Peterson's earlier victims, thanking him for finally bringing their daughter's killer to justice. Mr. Williams, the letter read, "Our daughter Sarah disappeared 3 years ago, and we never knew what happened to her. The police did their best, but there were no leads, no evidence, no answers. When you caught Michael Peterson, you gave us closure. You gave us the truth. You gave us the chance to finally bury our daughter and know that her killer will never hurt anyone else. Thank you for being the kind of police officer who never really retires from protecting people." Ray kept that letter in his desk drawer, a reminder that police work wasn't just about solving cases or making arrests. It was about standing between evil and innocence, about using experience and training to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, and about never losing the commitment to serve others. Even when the badge was retired, the house next door remained empty for months after the arrest, a crime scene that had revealed one of the most horrific killing sprees in the city's history. Eventually, it was sold to a young family who knew nothing of its dark history. Ray watched them move in with mixed emotions. Part of him wanted to warn them about what had happened in their basement, but he also understood that they deserved the chance to create new memories in a house that had seen too much horror. Instead, he made sure to be the kind of neighbor he wished everyone could have: alert, protective, and committed to keeping his community safe. Because Ray Williams had learned that true police officers never really retire. They just find new ways to serve and protect. The muffled screams that had awakened him that October night had led to justice for 14 victims and prevention of countless future murders. But more importantly, they had reminded Ray that experience, instincts, and courage could still make a difference, even in retirement. Some nights, Ray still woke up thinking he heard screams. But now, he knew that his hypervigilance, his inability to truly relax, his persistent awareness of danger, these weren't flaws to overcome in retirement. They were gifts to be treasured, skills to be honored, and tools to be used in service of others, for as long as he drew breath. Don't forget to leave your city and location in the comments below. Remember, every comment is a voice. Every voice is a change. What about you? Have you ever encountered an event or situation like this? Leave a comment. We'd love to hear your story.